Holy happy hour, Batman. I am Ben, that gamer priest. I'm an Episcopal priest, co founder of the All Ports Open Network. And on this show, Holy Happy Hour Batman, I am joined by heroes of the gaming and geek world to talk about life, faith, spirituality, game design philosophy, Elden Ring now, and whatever else comes up. We'll talk about Elden Ring again in just a minute, just like last week. But tonight on Holy Happy Hour, I have another. I'm very excited about tonight's episode. This is super exciting. I have another great, exciting, groundbreaking game designer joining me. I'm excited because we have Spencer Campbell joining the show, designer of the Lumen SRD and games like Nova, Light, and more. So we're going to be talking to Spencer all about what makes the Lumen SRD different and interesting, game design philosophy, psychology. We're going to get into some psychology, talk about psychology a little bit. And honestly, whatever else comes up, which could just be Elden Ring. We'll find out. So stick around. In just a moment, we're going to have a great conversation. I know it's going to be another awesome episode. So thanks for being here and joining us. You can bring your questions to the chat. If you have any questions at all for Spencer about just about anything, drop them in the chat and we will get to them. So a few things before we get into the show. This show, Holy Happy Hour Batman, is a production of allportsopen.com. Check out our website for our lineup of great shows, streams, podcasts, sharing, making, and talking about great stories like the hit horror audio drama Weeping Cedars, shows like my own superhero masks podcast, Delinquent Comics, and so much more. Speaking of masks, it is March. I had to actually glance down at the calendar to check, which is sad because what I'm trying to announce to you all is that we are still in the middle of March Masksness. It's in the name, and I glanced down at the calendar to see what month it was when I started saying that. March Masksness is a bracket-style competition of Mark's actual play masks. Mass actual play characters. So like basically different characters from different Masks actual play podcasts go head to head each day in a sort of fictional competition with each other. And there's a bracket system and it narrows down to the very end and someone gets a trophy. It's super fun. It's a great way to learn about Mass actual play podcasts that are out there. It's really, really cool, and it's just a lot of fun, and we hope you'll check it out. Our Delinquent Comics characters are in it. My character, Catalyst, was knocked out, but my character Catalyst, they were also a real long shot given that they were only ever in 2 episodes of Delinquent Comics, so didn't really have a lot of a fighting chance in that one. But we have Muse, I think tomorrow, certainly soon, and White Knight still left in the competition. You can go to marchmasksness.com up to vote and just check it out on Twitter. It's super fun. One other thing, this Wednesday, as in 2 days from now, my stream show, Big Time Space, which is a Troika comedy game, sci-fi game, is back from a 2-week hiatus at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time, and that's at the All Ports Open Twitch channel. So, think about joining us on Wednesday night at 9 p.m. It's super fun. It's just ridiculous and silly and very Troika-y, so super, super fun. Okay, so it is happy hour, and that means we have a cocktail up on the screen inspired by our guest, inspired by... this one is inspired by the game Light. Oh, I didn't even see all this. Tony chat in the chat there that I'm just catching up on now that I have switched over to the chat. But we have a drink on the screen inspired by the game Light and Lumen, I suppose, from Spencer Campbell. And you can see it's called You Are a Beacon, which is a Light reference. And this is sort of a take on a Paloma. If you ever had that classic Mexican drink, the Paloma tequila drink, you can use tequila or mezcal. But basically, it's 2 ounces tequila, an ounce of grapefruit juice, an ounce of lime juice. This is my take, so I made it different. And it has Lush grenadine, which is not regular grenadine. This is a specific kind of grenadine you have to buy called Lush grenadine, and it's better. A 3/4 ounce Lush grenadine, a 1/4 ounce of orgeat syrup. You basically salt the rim of a highball glass, and and then I basically flash blend this with 12 ounces or so of crushed ice, a couple of ice cubes, and just open/dirty pour it right into your salted rim glass. Super delicious. It's a bright drink that is supposed to be kind of pink and purpley. Whether that really is how yours turns out or not, I can't testify to. If you get some like light up ice cubes, I've got a bunch of them for going to Disney World too many times, and if you throw those in there, it's just like light it up like a beacon. So that's that's our drink for the week. Again, the rule always applies. If you make the cocktail for the week, you have to let us know. You have to let me know if you tried it, whether you liked it or not. It's super delicious, so I highly recommend it. I didn't clear this cocktail at all with Spencer, so, for all I know, Spencer's allergic to grapefruit. So we'll find that out in just a second. Speaking of, all right, let's go ahead and bring Spencer on the program here. Spencer Campbell, welcome to Holy Happy Hour, Batman. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm great. Are you allergic to grapefruit?
I am not.
Okay.
I'm okay.
It's one of those things that, like, surprising number of people are actually, allergic to.
Yeah, I think I'm in the clear. I mean, it's been a while since I've had grapefruit, but I'm pretty sure I'm in the clear with it.
Okay, good. I feel like you would probably know.
Yeah.
So as I referenced a bunch of times before I brought you on, it is Elden Ring season all over the world. I'm just going to use that as my excuse for, like, I feel like generally speaking, my audience numbers for Holy Happy Hour when it's live are down. And I feel like that's because of I'm just going to blame Elden Ring. I'm just going to credit Elden Ring for that. I feel like it's got to be. Can't be.
I had to pry myself away from my PlayStation to be here. I'm happy to be here, but there was that moment where I had to like unclaw my hands from the controller and be like, "Release, Spencer, release, and just relax for a second."
So, how is the game going for you? How long? How many hours? Well, maybe you don't want to admit how many hours into it you are, but like, how far are you generally? How's it going?
I don't know how many hours or how. I mean, I'm not far. But I have a lot of hours because I'm incredibly indecisive. I didn't play any of the Dark Souls games or Demon Souls. I played Bloodborne, and I really liked Bloodborne.
Okay.
So when I first started playing Elden Ring, I was like, okay, what class is the one that's going to be closest to a Bloodborne hunter? And none of them are really like that. So I was like, I'll just pick a Vanguard. That's the one that's good for beginners. And it was too slow. So I played that for a few hours and I didn't like it. Then I did the Astrologer. I played Astrologer for a long time, throwing my magic around. And then I was like, but I want to swing a sword. So today I started another character. It's like my fourth character now. I went with Samurai, and I'm having a blast with the Samurai. So that sounds
cool.
I think that's what I'm sticking with. But
so I have also not played a Souls game, so I'm curious, like, what your feelings are. But I didn't play Bloodborne either, so I'm just curious. Like, I keep talking to people the same question. I keep asking the same question for people who I find out haven't played the other ones. Like, is it still worth jumping into this one? Am I going to be frustrated? Like, what is it like as a new person to the kind of game, I guess?
I think inevitably people will be frustrated playing it because that is part of the experience of the game is getting destroyed. So like you will be frustrated, but that's a baked in element of the game. You have to go in knowing like, I'm going to die a million times and just like make peace with that. I was actually talking with HTTV Paladin yesterday about it, and they were saying, like, I just put a podcast on when I'm playing Elden Ring, and I don't worry that it distracts me because if I die, I know I'm going to die. So, like, whatever. And so I'll just say, as somebody who didn't play a lot of the Souls games, who played Bloodborne, this one feels relatively, like, engageable for somebody who's not like heavily versed in the gameplay mode that these games are based off of, because Bloodborne's a whole different beast. It's faster, it's more aggressive than this, but also this has like a big open world, which is pretty fun. So like you kind of just ride a horse around and have fun at the same time. So I say go for it. Yeah, everybody's doing it.
Everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it. That's we talked about this last week on the show. Well, I haven't seen them yet, but last week when we were doing the show, just name after name in the bottom right hand corner of my screen, the little pop up for different platforms, whether that's Steam or I'm trying to think of the other ones, but the person's name playing Elden Ring, like even friends of mine that are only kind of who aren't hardcore gamers necessarily, or they are, but they don't usually play games like this. They're all playing this game, so like I feel like I'm the last person to play, but it's just because I'll say it's because, and then we can move on from this game. I actually have a related TTRPG question, a good segue question that popped into my head, but I will say that like it's because I have Game Pass, and it's spoiled me.
Yeah,
because now I'm like, well, I could buy it, but I can play a billion games on Game Pass,
right?
So like, it's harder for me to buying a game.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
I pretty much just like only play Destiny. That's my go-to game. Like that's why many of my RPGs are the way that they are.
It makes sense.
And this is the game that has like fully unhinged me from Destiny, which I'm worried about because like a new expansion for Destiny just came out, and like there's still new stuff coming on. And I have no idea how I'm supposed to split my time between these things. It's a nightmare.
That's funny. So my segue question is, it's a 2-part segue question, which is, do you feel like Elden Ring is kind of like an opposite of design philosophy from like Lumen? And the other side of that question is, I guess maybe it's a 3-part question. The second one would be like, are there any games designed in Lumen that you know of that are like Elden Ring? And third, what would a Lumen game like Elden Ring look like? So three-part segue question.
All right, I'm gonna pull up my itch page because that'll help me. But
I know there's like a billion games in Lumen.
There's so many Lumen games, and so I'm inevitably gonna forget one.
Right, of course.
First of all, they're the complete total opposites of like, so Elden Ring is a video game mentality, game design philosophy, wildly different than mine, which is mine is the players should feel powerful and awesome constantly, and the GM should be facilitating that awesome feeling while also getting to feel awesome themselves. It's truly always about feeling awesome. Yeah, that's what I want in my games, especially games that are Lumen. Yeah. So, I mean, I will say when you do something really well in Elden Ring, it's the greatest feeling in the world because you're like, I am invincible. Right. I am the greatest. But that only happens after you get destroyed 20 times before that. And so like, I just want to capture that last moment, that 20th time where you like nail it. That's what I'm looking to capture. So, they're pretty different. And then I guess second part of that question was like, is there anything kind of I have a thought about, well, I guess before like we dig into like what it might look like to design a Lumen game like Elden Ring, I am wondering, like, do you think it's hard to have that so I lost exactly how you phrased it just now, but like that feeling of like amazing, like just like that amazing I'm invincible feeling that you get when you finally defeat the boss in Elden Ring? Like, is it possible to feel as amazing as that without the 40 failures beforehand? Right. That's why it feels so amazing. Is it's a sense of accomplishment. I think that's the big difference between them. Is like in Elden Ring, I have accomplished something. Like I learned how to. I studied this boss. I figured out I learned their moveset, and I figured out how to beat them. And I went and got the gear or whatever I needed in order to make that happen. In Lumen, you don't really need to earn your victory. It's just going to keep happening to you. So it's different. It's like accomplishment versus just like feeling amazing all the time. So I think they capture very different vibes.
I told you before the show that I always going to do something wrong in the tech side. And my folks who watch the show know I always do. and I totally did. I like just started streaming to the wrong YouTube, and like forgot to hit go live on Facebook. It's live on Facebook now, but hopefully it'll be live on the YouTube, and now we're live on the YouTube. You missed great Elden Ring conversation if you were coming to watch it. Yeah, I just was thinking about, I haven't read it in a long time, but the book Reality is Broken. Do you know that book? From Jane McGonigal. It's a book by the author Jane McGonigal. It's really good. It was like really popular like when PAX East started, and Jane McGonigal was a keynote at PAX East. I think like this maybe the second or third PAX East ever, like the first, like back when PAX East was one of the newer PAXs. But yeah, she has a she has a, oh my gosh, what's the name of that? My brain does this a lot of times. The name of that really famous series of lectures that everyone watches on the internet. That
TED Talks?
Yeah, thank you. She's got a TED Talk where she talks about the same core concept of reality is broken. But she like talks about that moment, that amazing, I forget what she calls it, but that gamer moment that like she has this great picture of a child like having one of those moments where their face is just, their mind is blown. And like, but maybe the difference is like, it's just about like what gives you that feeling, and whether the feeling is like, as you have said with Elden Ring, it's about like figuring out and accomplishing something that was hard to do. So I'm curious, like, you know, if Lumen gives you that feeling, but for something different, like how would you describe for people like what makes you feel amazing when you play a Lumen game, illuminated game,
Illuminated game.
Illuminated. I knew that's it. Illuminated game. Yeah.
The cool thing comes from a couple different places. One is mostly like, you say, can I do this? And then the GM will say, yes, you can. That's a good feeling that happens just all the time.
It really is such a good feeling.
Like not needing to ask permission or to like do a series of rolls to do like an action movie like thing. Just to say that you do it, and then you make like a real quick roll that almost guarantees you're going to do it, or like with some sort of consequence, but you're going to pull it off. So you just know, like, you're in this creative space where you can really play with what you want to be doing. You're not limited to the realms of whatever, you know, in certain systems where it's very granular in terms of what you are allowed to do during your turn. In this, it's just like, you get to do anything. What's one cool thing you want to do in your turn, and you can move. And so that kind of creative freedom lets people get creative with it. Like every time I've played a Lumen game with people, you really only have like a handful of powers usually as a character, but people always come up with creative ways to use them because they know, okay, these powers always work. How can I almost abuse them in this situation? And so it becomes a sort of like creativity task where people are trying to come up with unique uses for each situation. So I think that's where a lot of the awesome comes from, where people are just like, I've figured out a way to be even cooler right now. And a lot of it comes from just like tag teaming. It's, you know, I'm when I read comics a long time ago, and you know, you get the fastball special where Colossus is throwing Wolverine, and it's I want to like capture those fastball special moments in the game where like two players, you know, one after another get their powers going off for a cool action, and it just does something spectacular. And there's a lot of that ends up happening where people go, oh, I've got an idea after somebody does something. And it's just that moment of them going, oh, I can do this. And that's the fun thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say my GM philosophy has been for a long time, like to like say yes almost at any cost. Like, and because I totally agree, like it just gives you some of those best moments of like when you can say yes to someone's crazy idea, the one that they're not sure, and it's always the ideas where they're not sure the answer is going to be yes, right? Because even they think this thing I'm asking is so outlandish, the answer might be no. I've got an example from Delinquent Comics, the my Masks Actual Play podcast, where like because it captured that moment you described like on audio, and it's like I've listened to it a couple of times, in playbacks, and it gives me so much joy. And it's like one of our characters is playing. I don't know how familiar you are with the playbooks for Masks, but one of our characters is a Nova, which is like the I can do basically anything. I'm a super OP like character, and like she was like, "Can I turn back time and try to like reverse time and undo what just happened to somebody really bad that happened in the game?" And I was like, and I could never have guessed the person would ask that because they don't have time manipulation powers. It's like not their power set exactly, whatever. And I was not expecting them to undo this big event that just happened. But my answer was, so I stopped to think about it for a second. I'm like, okay, the answer is going to be yes. Like the answer is yes. But I'm just trying to figure out exactly what that means. And so there's this great moment in the recording where I say like the answer is yes, and then one of my players just got such a kick out of that and just repeated it and was like, the answer is yes. Like the answer is gonna be yes. Because you're right, like it just gives you such a set. It's great because you can hear exactly what you're describing from the players in the moment of like that satisfaction of being told yes.
There's somebody who's in my Discord server who they have started posting their Lumen play reports. He's playing like tons of Lumen games, like with a group of friends, just rotating through them, which is really cool just to see different Lumen games played. And then we get these little mini reports.
That's awesome.
And the thing that inspired the whole thing in the beginning was a frustration with a player who wanted to, and I can't remember if it was 5e or Pathfinder or something like that, but a player wanted to do something as simple as I jump over the bench and throw my knife. And that's a series of checks that you have to make in some games, as opposed to that. No, that and the GM basically saying you can't actually do that. You don't have the feet for it. So like, no, but like at level whatever, you're going to be able to do it. And so this person said, let's just try these. They're very different, these Lumen games, and they have all just attached onto that idea of yes, and then this cool thing happens, and then throw a yes, but in there as well. But still, it's yes something, right? These play reports are so much fun for me to read.
That's super cool.
Just to see people engaging with the wide variety of Lumen games that are out there and just like having a blast with it. And that's what I want, is I just want people to have fun with a game.
Yeah. I mean, what I love about the way Lumen works, just like I like Powered by the Apocalypse with like dice rolling and failure, is I love that it makes failure fun. And I think that that's really what makes those games just such a blast, because you don't really mind failure. Like you're more specific in Lumen that there's failure with a consequence.
Right.
Powered by the Apocalypse sometimes depends on the game, but sometimes I feel like it's like you always mark potential. Well, you always get XP basically when you fail, but it's not always clear to me in all Powered by the Apocalypse games that there's like what the consequence is for failure. Or even that there is one other than failure. But I like that the idea in Lumen is like, yeah, you fail with a because that makes it fun, because the consequence is interesting.
Yeah, because you're already this like ridiculously powerful person. So it then becomes like, what is a consequence for somebody who's as powerful as me? And now it's an opportunity for the GM to have some fun, where they could say, yeah, I'm probably not going to kill you. I'm not going to be able to, or it's going to be really hard. So I'm going to challenge you over here. I'm going to make you engage things differently. I'm going to try and take something that you want, right? And so you get to play as the GM in a fun space too, where consequences aren't just like, all right, well, I deal 2 harm to you. It can be that, but it could also be anything you can think of to try and possibly put more walls in front of these unstoppable juggernauts that are charging towards their goal right now.
Yeah, it's super cool. So tell people the like origin of Lumen, like where did this game come, or did the SR, I guess, what came first, and how did the SRD get born, I guess?
Yeah, so Light was first, and that came out in November of 2020. which feels like a long time ago now.
Doesn't
that I
it?
say that.
It really does, doesn't it? And it's
Feels
not that long ago, but it
really
feels
not
like
that
forever
long.
ago.
um,
Well, we lost in some ways. Like I always tell people, we lost 2 years. We really didn't, like obviously, but like in some ways we did, and so I think that that increases the feeling of gap between now and then.
yeah. So Light came first, and that was just me in a fit of inspiration, like in 48 hours, writing a Destiny inspired, very rules light game where I was just like, I got to get this out of my head. And it's proto Lumen. It's not quite Lumen yet. It doesn't have all the features that a Lumen game has, but it had like the bones of what would become Lumen. And so I did that. That was really fun. Still working on light stuff today. And that was sort of like the basis, like that built the foundation. And then the next thing is I said, okay, let me add on to this. How can I add more structure to this in a new game? That's when I made Frame, which I'm not sure. Not I don't know if you know about the Frame fiasco or not.
No, I
But
don't think I do actually.
more or less, long story short,
Sure.
I made a Warframe inspired game that upgraded sort of the rules of light into a more what would become Lumen. And I put it up on Kickstarter. And within 2 hours, I was harassed by Warframe gamers to cancel the project.
So actually, I remember when this happened, and I remember reading about it happening when it happened, but I have lost the connection between that happening and you in the subsequent time between now and then. But oh man, I'm sorry about that. That's rough.
So it sucked, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
But
it's awful.
In that time that I kind of like shuttered it away from everything, I said, okay, I still think Frame is a very good game. What I did with the upgrades from between Light and Frame is good and should be used. Let's make something of it. And so Lumen came out then after Frame. It was me stripping all of the paint off of Frame and said, okay, I'm going to remove every bit of setting, every bit of thing that's whatever, and here's just the rules. And then I do not like traditional SRDs at all. Traditional SRDs are technical documents, like they're manuals, which serve a function. They're just not the function that I prefer. I prefer toolkits.
I want to talk about the design philosophy of writing the SRD and like what it's, because it's not like reading any other SRD.
So I took that mentality, I injected it into Lumen. So I call it an SRD, but it's really more like a creator toolkit. So that was released in April of last year. And upon releasing that, I was like, all right, I'm now going to re-release Frame, but I'm going to put a brand new coat of paint on it. I'm going to change the setting entirely. And that would eventually become Nova, but Nova is also a wildly different game than Frame was, because I was like, I don't want to repaint this. I'm going to make it its own thing, its own interpretation of Lumen. And so Nova was last summer, then it followed a couple months after the release of Lumen. So that's sort of my trajectory is Light came first. It wasn't exactly Lumen. I gave Lumen structure, and then I kind of broke some of that structure with Nova.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, wow, it's crazy to me that you would have that experience with Kickstarter and not just be like, okay, and now I'm walking away for good.
Yeah.
Bye. I'm cool. I don't need that in my life. What does it take to say, like, you know what, I'm gonna dust myself off and I'm gonna come back to the scene?
Lumen is my revenge. It's my revenge project against gamers. So I was eventually interviewed by Chase Carter, who did a write-up on Dicebreaker after Frame, and I basically said, I hate gamers. Like, I don't care for gamers at all as like as a group. They are monsters. So I'm not going to cater to them anymore. I'm not going to appeal to them. What I am going to do is I'm going to release this Lumen SRD, which is going to let every TTRPG designer out there take their favorite video game and make an RPG out of it. So it's not just me. Now all of us are doing it with all of your favorite games. What are you going to do now? So it was my grand revenge scheme. That's how I did it. I was fueled by spite and rage.
That's kind of hilarious. Yeah, well, I mean, it's resonated with a ton of people. I mean, there are so many Lumen games. I think we talked about that like a few minutes ago, but do you happen to know how many there are?
There's 64, I think 64 or 65 that are on. Like I have a collection of itch.
Yeah, I have the link.
I have a collection of them on itch.
Mm-hmm. I'll link that in the chat.
Yeah, I think there's like 64, 65, something like that. And those are the ones that I'm aware of. They're
right.
I like every once in a while I find one that I had no idea existed. Like, nobody has to reach out to me, but like they never reached out to me and said like, hey, I made this thing. What do you think? Like,
right.
These games just exist out there, and which is a really cool feeling. I actually kind of like that people don't need to like check with me on it. They're like, yeah, I just made a game with your rules and I did it on my own. I don't need you. Yeah, absolutely, go for it. So yeah, it's a really cool collection. It's wild. It's mind-blowing the variety of different approaches that folks have taken with the game, not only in like theme, but every single person that I have ever talked to who made one of these games said, hey, Spencer, yeah, I liked the SRD. I broke it by doing X, Y, and Z. And every time I'm like, you did the right thing, because I've never even made a game that's just straight Lumen out of the SRD. So everybody breaks it, and that's the point. And
right, exactly.
That's it. It's a toolkit, right? I think that's the important thing. Then, if it's not considered an SRD where people feel like they have to copy and paste the rules and stick to them, but instead it's a toolkit that you can use to build something that invites people to change things, that invites people to play with it in a way that makes it their own, as opposed to saying, well, the SRD says this is the rule, so this is the rule, sort of thing.
That's really fascinating. I am curious about that. Yeah, when I wanted to ask you, like, what about you mentioned the distinction of SRD and toolkit, and I think you even described the Lumen SRD as like a conversation with you, and it's written conversationally. So yeah, I was going to ask you like why one versus the other as far as a model, and you said it's like kind of what you like, it's personal, it's like what you prefer. But yeah, like why not the other model? Like why, like what's your like what led you to write it this way?
Yeah, I want to inspire creative freedom in people. I think a lot of people who come to Lumen will come to it from a much more trad game background. And in trad games, there's clear delineations of power. There's clear, you can do this and you can't do this, sort of. And so it happens almost daily where somebody will write to me and say, hey, can I do this with your game? And it's like, man, you can do whatever you want with my game. Like I'm not your dad. I'm not there. I can't stop you. Even if I didn't want to, I can't stop you. So like interpret the setting in whatever way you want, like tweak the rule to whatever way that works for you. I've always thought of games that way. Since I was a kid, I've been changing the rules of games that I play. So I wanted to let people know that not only do I want you to do that, but it's okay to do that. Like you should make this your own and just use this as like, this is how one guy thinks about this game and this genre. But like, this is just my own interpretation of it. Your interpretation is going to be way cooler than mine. So do yours. And that just comes from telling people that they're allowed to do that. And that then inspires the tone of conversational approach to it, as opposed to, again, like SRDs that I've read in the past, which are, they're just the rules. They're just the rules stripped out and all the setting is gone. And that's that doesn't say what you can do with them. It says this is the rules of the system. And I adopt this mentality in like every GM section I've ever written is mostly me saying like, hey, do whatever you want with this. Hey, I left a lot of holes in this game. That was intentional. You will fill them. So I think also a big inspiration to all of this is my like my first campaigns were more traditional campaigns, but my most like formative campaigns that I've played were with improvisers, like professional improvisers out of Chicago, where like they're just unstoppable in what they can do at the table, and just like, oh, I could have all the rules I want and they're not going to listen to it. So like I have to learn to just say yes and go with them. And that I absorbed that energy so much and put it into my games as a result. Like my brother is an amazing comic out of Chicago, and like him and his friends and other people that I was introduced to, like those are the people that have made those games the way that they are.
I think that like I resonate deeply with that, because I, as a GM, like years ago, before I was contemplating like the idea of designing games and things like that, just like learning how to GM, like found that, and I don't know the solution when this doesn't happen, but like I found that like in the gaming groups that I played in, people loved playing in my games, not because I did anything crazy. Like I'm not super creative, or like I don't come up with like really crazy good ideas for like settings or story or whatever. But people loved playing my games, like because I was telling them yes, and because I got really invested in the things they wanted to do. And that was partially because of laziness. It was because I wanted my players because my number one priority was I wanted them to have fun. And I found that saying yes was leading to them having a maximum amount of fun. And they were having more fun the more I like invested in whatever they wanted to do. But I had to do way less work. My ideal games as a GM are the ones where like what you said about like people who are like really good at just improvising and want to get really into it, and they just want to go on their own tangent, just doing whatever. Like, and I'm just like, yep, cool, yeah. I'm like, I'm rooting for them, like in whatever their crazy scheme they're cooking up, and like whatever crazy oddball idea they have. That like, does the game allow for this? No. Are we gonna do it? Hell yes, we are. Like I just like that just became my GM philosophy, right? But it was years. And actually, I don't really know what to do. My stumbling as a GM has always been when my players don't play like that. Like if I have a game, especially because I run a Saturday night game club, and you just never know who's going to sit down at the table in an environment like that. And when I have like, I've had to learn how to run for people who aren't going to just do that. You know, they're not just going to take the ball and run with it. And that's a very different sort of environment.
That's very different for sure. My standard GM prep is maybe like 3 sentences on a page, and be like, yeah, I can figure it out from this.
Exactly.
Because my other big thing, and folks have noticed this on like the streams that when I do AP streams and I GM, I have a very specific way I GM, which is I always start every session by asking players questions that build the session. Yeah. So I take my 3 sentences that are like the major concepts of what the session is going to be about, and I make the players answer questions that like connect their character to the thinnest plot that I could possibly imagine. And now they buy in. Like even if they aren't one of those people who are improv champion ready to go, they now have a hook. They now know their player knows this thing about the mission. And so now they've got a thing at least, right? And so that's my big thing is I figure out what the mission is from what they say, and now they care about it because they each have a thing about it that they know, or they're the specialist, or they've heard a rumor about, or they've encountered before, or whatever.
Yes. Oh, I love that. It was years, before like I was finding indie games that were giving me that experience in the game design. And only recently, really, I guess. that I think that like because I was we were trying to do that with like games like D&D and in fairness probably the game system that I encountered that the most because it fit more than D&D was like playing games like playing like Deadlands, playing Savage Worlds games, and like yeah. So it took, but it was years before because playing D&D was always like, okay, well we're just gonna set the rules aside to be able to take that ball and run with it,
Right.
because the rules would just kind of get in the way. Not always, but like a lot of times we'd have to like be willing to bend or break them.
Yeah.
So it was years before. Well, I want to you kind of touched on this, and I want to get into your sort of we're working backwards now from but how did you get into games in the first place? Like, what's your? I always like to ask people what their TTRPG origin story is. Backstory.
So yeah, my origin as a game designer is since I was 5. When I immediately started changing all rules and also memorizing all rules. My dad has a joke that he says like, we never need a rule book, we have a Spencer, which is very funny to me. And I just absorb them, but I change them constantly. So I've been doing design since I was a kid. But my RPG origin story, I didn't start playing RPGs until grad school. So 10 years ago, something like that, probably. And there was a bunch of us who were all, every Friday at the end of the week, we would stay in our offices and we would play Magic after we finished our grading and stuff. And so we'd just play Magic the Gathering, and we're like, do we want to try something else? We played board games, and somebody just pitched the idea of, let's try doing a role-playing game. And so I was put in charge of learning the rules and running the show because, again, that's what a Spencer does. And we didn't start with D&D. I didn't play D&D for a long time after I had started playing role-playing games. We started, earliest games were Powered by the Apocalypse games that were not official Powered by the Apocalypse games, that were somebody's like random homebrew of like, so like we played a somebody's version of Shadowrun, but that used PBTA, and it was just like their own made up playbooks, and we're just trying to figure it out as we go. And like I made Star Wars playbooks to play with some friends who were really into Star Wars. I'm like, I think I can figure out how to make these things, and I just kind of made them. So my origin story is in like the weirdest of homebrews already, which I think just kind of makes sense then that how I ended up being the person who just makes weird homebrews of things. And so, yeah, that I started with weird PBTA games and then dabbled immediately into other indie RPG. I got into D&D. So I was playing like Blades in the Dark, Inspire before I even got to D&D. Did one little short campaign of D&D and couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. It's just personally not for me. So I dipped out of that, and yeah, I don't know. I have a weird origin story. I'm not I got the rule book passed on by like my dad or anything like that. I downloaded somebody's random homebrew of Shadowrun as a PBTA game. It said, figure this out.
There is no, I will say, having asked that question for almost a year now to different game designers, there's like no standard origin story for anybody, you know what I mean? Like except for one common thread among all the game designers I talk to is like that they trace back what they do to their childhood in some way. For some people that's like playing RPGs since they were a kid or reading RPG rulebooks since they were a kid. For a lot of people though, it's just like what you said too, of like, I like to learn rules or hack rules or make up rules. Like Adira was on the show last Monday and said like, she's like, yeah, I've been writing games since I was a child, like a young child, like 5, like, and I do feel like that's a common experience among people who design games is like they've always loved to make games, which makes sense, right? I mean, you're a psychologist, right? So like, I mean, it make like play is this incredible human thing that has to do with like, I mean, I guess it depends on your, from my in my perspective, it kind of has to do with like learning how to transition in the world and transition away from like, in most cases mother into a dangerous scary world, and like learning how to transition, and so like so play is this quintessential human experience, so like it makes sense to me that childhood would be a common
Yeah.
theme among designers of games.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, cool. I'm glad to hear that so many folks also have the like, I just tinkered with things when I was a kid origin
I will
story.
say the part of it where you like randomly download a homebrew PBTA, that's pretty unique. But it's cool. Like, and also I just want to say like, if you started by playing those games, I just don't. Who's the person that this is going to be in it? This is a hot take. Who's the person that like plays all those other games and then plays D&D and is like, oh yeah, now I'm going to play D&D? Like,
Right.
like no.
I played these incredible games that are designed to like capture very cool experiences, and then like went to D&D, and I was like, why did we do this? Why have we gone in this direction? This is so backwards.
I love it. I love it. And I feel bad. Like I just don't see. I don't want to. I also don't like the hating on people who like D&D thing that I see a lot of times out there in this space, in the indie scene. On the other hand, and so this is personal statements that I'm making about how I feel about it, but like I just like can't see myself unless like let's say, I guess if I have people where they're like, we really want to play D&D, will you play or run D&D for us because that's the only thing we're willing to play? And like unless it's like some weird circumstance like that where I'm like bending over backwards for a particular group of people for some reason, like if I'm just picking a game out, I just don't see in what universe with all of the games out there that I could play that do all the amazing things that they do, why I would just ever play that game again. Like it's just like I've played it, it's we've moved past it. I don't know. Is it fair to say we've moved past it? It feels like we've moved past it.
I think a lot of, I mean, you're mostly talking to indie RPG people. So
Yes.
yeah, we've all moved past
We've all
it.
moved
But
past it.
the vast majority of people haven't, and
Right,
that's
right.
fine. If you found your, like, I play until this Elden Ring thing, I pretty much only play Destiny. I'm
Right.
like, Destiny's my game, and
Right.
I will just play Destiny. Now, I wasn't going around saying you can hack Destiny to make any experience. 'Cause
That's it. That's it right
the
there.
problem.
Yes.
Like, I understand that Destiny does this one thing, it does it very well, and that's the experience I want.
Exactly.
I don't live in a delusional world where I think Destiny is the game that does all things.
Right.
But like, if there are folks out there who like D&D scratches the itch that they've got, like,
Sure.
more power to them. Like that works. It's just not. I don't have that itch. I've got a different scratch that I've gotta do. I gotta get my weird power game going on. I gotta get the loosest of rules. I gotta have my 3 sentences of prep and be like, that's all I need. I don't need stats. I don't need numbers.
It's almost like it's just like it's insane how many games and how many genres and how many it's just the indie explosion we are still in the midst of right now is mind-boggling to me. And like I could play a different game every week for the rest of my life now. It feels like, and probably not even scratch the surface of the games that are out there.
Even come close.
Wouldn't even come close. Yeah, every week, every day, maybe. Yeah, I mean, like, and so it's just like, how do you even decide what to play these days? And that's cool as shit. I don't even have a thought for that. I don't have. That's the end of my thought. I don't have any. That's not taking me anywhere. But
well, I think that's an important thought though, that folks like know that, because a lot of people will like. So we had some friends over and they looked at my games and they said like, oh, what are these? And I said they're role playing games, and they're like D&D. And the smart thing to say is yes, they are like D&D, even though my games are nothing like D&D. To say yes so that they understand what this concept is, and then I can onboard them. Because once I said they understood the concept. Then I said, here are some other ones. And I showed them For the Queen and Alice is Missing. and I explained these as like concepts to them, and they're like, "That sounds very cool. I want to do that." So, but they were able to transfer their understanding of this concept of the game because they understood the cultural weight of D&D, and they understood then like what the concept of For the Queen was trying to do.
Now they started with D&D though, like by asking you. Now that's different than maybe right if you had just been like, "Hey, you guys want to play a game? I've got this game here called For the Queen," and if somebody said to you, "Oh yeah, what kind of game? What's it like?" You may not have said, I don't know. You may not have said.
I wouldn't have said D&D.
Right.
I would have said, "Hey, remember when you were a kid and you played make believe and you pretended to be things? That's what this is." Because everybody played some form of make believe as a kid. Everybody pretended to do something, and so that's all those books are. Every book on the shelf is just make believe. So you've done it. All these folks have done it. They just haven't. They're like Peter Pan in Hook, who he's just forgotten. He's forgotten what it means to be a kid. I love that analogy.
That's so good. That's so good.
Right? You just need to remember what it was like to play make believe as a kid again, and you will get into these things. My go-to intro game to for people who've never played RPGs before is End of the World, which is an RPG where you play yourself during the apocalypse. So you don't have to embody a different character. You just are you. And so the GM says, like, what would you do? It's literally, what would you do? And I play, like, I strip away a lot of the rules of it because there's a lot of stuff that you don't need. And I always run it as a one shot that ends on a cliffhanger. But like, it's very fun for people to character create themselves and then like pretend to be themselves for an hour or two.
I want to do that now really badly. It sounds so good. It's awesome.
It's in every single time, people who have no idea how to do this. They aren't the improvisers. They're not the people who are like really big into games. They get it right away because it's me saying, "Okay, there's like a swarm of birds flying down on you right now. What do you do?" They go, "Okay, I can imagine myself being attacked by a swarm of birds. I can play with this space." And once they do that, once they realize that they're allowed to just make things up, then you start giving them the other games. Then you start giving them like, "All right, now do you want to be somebody else other than you? Do you want to go over into this weird world over here?" And then that's how you get them.
So we teased that you're a psychologist, and I'm just curious about that background. Like, how did you get into psychology? Tell us about your, what kind of psychology you do and teach, and
So I'm a cognitive psychologist. So I got into psychology as an undergrad. I wasn't going to be a psychology major. I was going to be a teacher, secondary ed teacher, so a high school teacher. One of the first classes you have to teach or take is Intro to Psych. And I took that, and the professor was amazing. Shout out to Dr. Vincent. He was amazing. And I was like, I'm going to do this instead.
Where did you go to undergrad? If you don't, is it okay to ask that?
Yeah. I went to Augustana College. It's a small liberal arts college right on the border of Illinois and Iowa. So I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. So I always say it was far enough that my parents would never like randomly drop in because it's like 2.5, 3 hours away. But close enough that I could get home when I needed to get home.
I hear that.
Perfect distance.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went there for undergrad, had a great time, got converted into psychology, but I didn't know what I was going to do with psychology until my junior year. That's when I took a cognitive course.
Okay.
And I said, this is the area of psychology that I really like, but I still wanted to teach. So I wanted to be a professor. So that's what I am. I'm a professor of psychology.
What is distinguished about, like, what makes cognitive psychology distinct?
Yeah. So cognitive psychology studies the basic cognitive functions of the brain. So cognition is thinking. So it's the study of things like memory, language, decision-making, problem-solving, creativity, things like that. So when you start to add up a lot of those things, it kind of makes sense with games like decision-making, problem-solving, creativity, things like that. Language. And so I got my PhD in cognitive psychology, and my specialty was in text and discourse processing. So I studied what our eyes are doing on the screen right now as we look at text to like process it and turn it into meaning and things like that. But I now I broadly just teach cognitive psychology and also the research side of psychology. So whenever I tell people I'm a psychologist, many of them will want to know about therapy and things like that. And that is not the realm. I don't know anything about that.
Yeah,
that's not my zone. I'm on the the science research side of psychology. And so that's what I do as a psychologist. That's my day job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that if I were to, like, if I had to pick a second career now at this point in my life so I interacted with psychology like a little bit, going through like studying to become a priest. And like, it's wildly fascinating to me. Like it's like the thing that fascinates me more than, like, if I was going to leave professional religion and do something else, it's without a doubt what I would do. But certainly like research or stuff, like I'm not interested I wouldn't want to do therapy because I feel like that's like, I do, people want me to do therapy for them now. I don't, like, as it's not my job and I shouldn't be doing therapy for people as a priest, but I certainly wouldn't want to leave this to do that. That seems like a terrible choice. But like conceptually, theoretically, like the psychological theory wildly fascinates me. So I'm always really interested in talking about psychology because I'm just wildly fascinated by, I did philosophy as my undergrad, and like philosophy of language and stuff like that interests me from the philosophical side, but then I like equally find the psychological side of that stuff as interesting. I guess that I would love to dabble more into how it interacts with game theory, because like I feel like that's something I've only dipped my toe into, but it's got to be an ample fertile ground, right?
It inspires a lot of my design in terms of understanding things like creativity and even things like cognitive load, like what somebody can hold in their head and think about at a given time. I teach a whole class on the psychology of role-playing games. And so I talk about, it's mostly split half and half between cognitive concepts and social psychology concepts. But like a lot of the cognitive concepts do have to do with, games that have theater of the mind, right? Like as combat and things like that. What is our brain literally doing as we map that? And how can we link up things like spatial processing to other skills to be predictors of who will be like more easily able to engage with theater of the mind, and how can we ease those things? So I want to know.
I want to take that class so badly. I want to know about more about all of that stuff you just said. That's super interesting.
It's a really fun class, and it's basically split between the students are playing role-playing games, and I choose games that are GM-less because most of the students who take the class have never played a role-playing game before, which is great.
Yeah.
They get to try these things, so they'll play something for a little while, then we'll talk about it, and then we'll talk a little bit about theory that connects to it, and then they'll try something else, and we'll debrief, and then we talk about theory related to it. It's a real I can't believe this is a class I get to teach.
It's like the dream, right?
Yeah, it is very cool.
How many semesters have you taught it?
I've done it 3 times so far, and I will be doing it again as a summer course this summer. So that's
awesome. So what games do you use in the curriculum?
I switch it up. I switch it up. A common one that I've used multiple times is Fiasco. Fiasco's good just because, again, GM-less, and once the Fiasco's tricky with the first scene. The first scene, students don't know what they're supposed to do because it truly is just like start acting. And for a lot of them, they're like, I don't know my classmates. These are all strangers. What do you mean start acting?
For what it's worth, a lot of seasoned role players don't know what to do in the first scene of Fiasco.
It's hard. It's a real rough start. But if you can get started, I watch these students and it just becomes pandemonium in the class in the best possible way as you watch these scenes, these movies come to life. So that's a common one. I mentioned For the Queen earlier. That one always works. And then I switch it up. I look and see rules like GM list games have recently come out, and I incorporate them. So last time I used Travis Hill's Humans game, which is just a game about animals pretending to be humans at a party, and it's just goofy fun.
Yeah.
So I look and see. I have a collection of them that I know that I want to use eventually. But I'm always just looking for like, ooh, what fun, cool GM list thing did somebody come out with recently that I could use?
Yeah, so I'm curious if there's if there's any kind of explanation from a psychological perspective of like that experience of like not knowing what to, so like I said, even as a seasoned role player, like the first time my spouse and I um Starcrossed, we like, again, I've been role playing for over 20 years, right? Like I play, and the first time we played Starcrossed, the first scene, I remember we looked at each other and my wife was like, "So wait, what exactly do we do? Like, what do we start doing?"
Right.
And because it doesn't like, it just kind of lets you start. Like, it's
Right.
very loose on like what you actually do, and it's much less directive. And I'm curious if there's like a psychological element to that like, ooh, that cold feet feeling, or that like, oh, I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at like problem solving theory where generally like problems are defined or split between being well defined or ill defined. Like a well defined problem has a clear goal and clear constraints, like rules that you can play in. Like a Sudoku is a well defined problem. You know what the end game looks like, there's no interpretation to it. But ill defined problems either don't have a clear goal or have very ill defined constraints, or both, and then they're truly a nightmare. And Fiasco and Star Crossing games like that are ill-defined, and I'm not like
No, I know what
slamming
you
them,
mean.
but
Yeah,
like
you mean like in a technical sense.
from the theoretical definition,
Right.
are ill-defined games. The constraints and the goal are both unclear. Uh, the constraints basically in Fiasco say whoever you decide to go first is going to just start a scene,
Right.
right? They either start a scene or they pick an outcome. And then if they pick the outcome, then it's now the problem is just shifted to the group. And when it goes to a
Right.
group, we're way worse at
Right.
making decisions. So we're in this ill-defined space because we don't have the clear constraints to begin with. We struggle. Once we have a scene that happens, constraints build themselves over the game of Fiasco, right? Like
That's
people start to understand, like, oh, people are generally speaking in first person or third person. Generally, like the scenes have these sorts of vibes where, like, they go this long, or we do that, like we allow you to like transition to another place. Like none of that stuff is defined ahead of time. The constraints are built over the course of the game, and when they do, then the game starts to really flow because now you know what you are in a sandbox now, as opposed to in a desert where there is nothing but sand on the horizon. You're like, it's all the same. It doesn't matter which direction I go. How am I supposed to pick which direction to walk in? You're in a sandbox now. I know what I can play with. And so that's sort of, at least a bit off the top of my head, what is going on.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I mean, like, I never thought about it that way, but like, yeah, the game that I've been working on, my 2-player breakup game called Broken, it's similarly like the first person that goes in a scene, essentially, like, someone picks up an object and then they like set a scene. And then there's no guidance whatsoever. You just similar to the games you just described, you just sort of like start playing in the scene. And I was tempted to like try to help people with that experience, like in the rules, but actually I decided not to. I think that like letting it be, because I have found, without knowing what it was that I have found, what you just described, that like people and they're unique, it's two people, and together they sort of figure out, oh, this is what we're doing.
Right.
They sort of figure it out as they play. And it's not going to look the same necessarily for two different groups of two or two different pairs, but like it doesn't have to. In fact, actually, it's kind of cool that it doesn't.
Right. And you don't want to predict that, right? You don't want to try
exactly.
and predict or put the path in front of them. You want them to build the path.
That's
going
it.
to create the
That's
story that they care about.
Right.
So like it's going to be uncomfortable at first, but like we just acknowledge that. We just acknowledge like, hey, the first scene's going to be weird, everybody. Like we're not really sure how this works. You as a table, you as a group are going to figure this out. And like when you acknowledge that at the beginning, like you like acknowledge the shortcomings and the limitations, it helps so much. People then go like, oh, okay, so I shouldn't feel bad because I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now as the first player. You go like, okay, we're all figuring this out. We'll figure it out together. And that helps.
Yeah. I don't even know whether what I'm about to ask is like a question. I'm just sort of like teasing out, connecting the dots of this to something I was thinking about when we were talking about Lumen versus like Powered by the Apocalypse, because like, when you were talking before in Lumen about not wanting to write it in such a way as to like say, oh, this is what you should do with this. It's more of like just an invitation to say like, hey, do whatever you want with this. This is a conversation to like, I think that I was thinking about that versus Powered by the Apocalypse, which in some ways does that, but in other ways, forgive me if this is really, if I'm not explaining what I'm thinking well, and I'm curious if you get the same vibe, but like, I think Powered by the Apocalypse sometimes actually is very particular about like, well, this is the kind of game this is, and this is like the kinds of games that this. I mean, Lumen does that too, right? By saying like, "Hey, this is super powered games. People should feel super powered when they play it." But I don't know. I feel like with Powered by the Apocalypse, it's much more, maybe directive is the right word.
Yeah, I mean it is because playbooks and moves in Powered by the Apocalypse game tell you immediately what this game is about and like what the types of stories that you're supposed to, or not supposed to, but you should typically are told
that this game tells, right? This game tells these kinds of stories, even with a particular ethic, right? Like,
right. And like the names of the moves are chosen specifically to evoke certain things. Like they are there to make you think, okay, this is the mood, this is the genre, this is the tone, this is the expectations. And because, and it's, it's hard to compare them because we're comparing like a PBTA game, like a game that has all that, and then an SRD that doesn't have any of that, which is just like, make whatever you want. Because then once you see somebody's Lumen game, it does start to look like what a PBTA game looks like, where it's like, this is the type of story that we're telling here. Like, these are the names of the attributes, meaning I've now told you the 3 most important ways that you're going to act in this world. So I think I understand where you're going. I think that the disconnect comes from thinking about comparing like an SRD where all that stuff has been stripped, to like a PBTA game where it's like, we know what this is about.
Yeah, I do wonder if there's not something about the character of PBTA that is also like, that also begs that or invites it. And I don't know. I mean, I've been thinking about this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think so. Cause like still, even though it gets into specifics, like there is a lot more in a PBTA game about like what a player can do or the moves that kind of get activated through fictional positioning and things like that, compared to most Lumen games are, you all have the same 3 attributes and then you've got like 3 or 4 powers, which means you don't have a lot of buttons to push. You need to figure out how you're going to push them in an interesting way that makes it fun and interesting, as opposed to Powered by the Apocalypse games. As you start to like unlock your playbook, as you start to see your moves, you're like, I know what this character is about. And I like, it feels like there's more there for the player to hold on to, but also then to be like guided towards a particular thing, as opposed, and that's intentional. That's what a playbook is supposed to do.
Right.
Compared to a Lumen game where it is just kind of like, I don't know, you got 3 things. You do things hard, fast, or slow. How do you want to do it?
Yeah, I just, I think maybe part of the difference is that idea of like, okay, so like, what the hell do you want to do with this character you have in front of you, versus like a more guided game that's like, okay, we're going to tell a particular kind of story together. This is giving us guardrails so that we tell this particular kind of story. And it will be unique to us. What do you want to do in those guardrails?
Right.
But it's still more guarded. At least that's kind of like the distinction I see between the two of them as I'm kind of, I don't know.
Yeah,
overthinking and unpacking these games. I overthink these for a living now, basically.
It's every day.
Right,
every day is me looking at this and way overthinking every decision I've made. And like, should I just undo all of this? The number of drafts I have of things, like it's the name of the game.
It is the name of the game. Well, so are there? A question I had for you was: are there any Lumen games that just particular? And I almost hate to ask you this because because it begs you to give an answer that excludes the rest of them. But is there any Lumen game that you saw it, or someone showed it to you, or you whatever, or they told you about it, and you just blew your mind? You're like, oh, I didn't see that coming, or wow, I can't believe that happened with it. I don't know. Any you can kind of go with it, whatever direction you want.
I'll cheat and choose two.
Yeah, of course.
Because they did it. They did it. They did it in. I mean, I have so many Lumen games that I love, but there are two in particular that like surprised or shocked or blew me away in that sort of like surprise sort of way. So one is Our Farm Becomes the Battlefield.
I saw that one on the list and I was immediately drawn to it.
It's explicitly anti-capitalist game in which you create a farming co-op, but you use these like golems that are your farming equipment eventually to lead a revolution against your capitalistic wizard overlords. And it's there to teach you about being anti-capitalist. It's there to teach you about co-ops, about like responsible farming and responsible consumption of food. Also being a Lumen game where you get into these like farming golems to lead a revolution. I never thought anything like that because I'm putting my mindless bullet hell games, like looter shooter games into this. And someone's like, actually, I have really important things to say about farming and capitalism. I'm going to do it. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah,
so that one, I got to shout that one out every single time.
Yeah.
The other one is, I'm going to go with Vibe Check.
Okay.
By Josh Hiddie. And Vibe Check is a video game inspired game. It's inspired by The World Ends With You, which is a game that I didn't play. I was actually lucky enough to be a playtester on this game.
Okay.
And what Josh did with Vibe Check in terms of capturing like stylistic combat is like unmatched in any other game that I have played. Like style, not like literally like in the clothes that your characters are wearing mattering. And so like you're like putting together a good fit so that you like you look good and are efficient on the battlefield. But Josh captured the concept of sort of like creating a flow between the players where they are constantly building off of one another. That's intentionally built into the game. That fastball special thing I mentioned a while ago.
Yeah.
That was something that I just kind of like hoped people would do. Josh is like, no, I'm going to like make that happen because that's going to be the whole impetus of the game is to try and flow off of each other. And so I think Josh's game is like
the art is really cool for it too. Like this art,
the layout, everything is so good. It's unbelievably stylish. And like I said, if you've never played The World Ends With You, you will still enjoy it because I didn't know anything about that game and still had a hell of a time with it.
It's just really cool looking. Nice.
There's so many of them.
Well, that's the thing.
I could go on. You give me like 3 hours, and I could tell you like what each one is doing in its own cool, unique way.
Well, I mean, that's a cool thing. Like that you even, I don't know, like the fact that you are as interested in the things people have designed with it. Like you wouldn't have to be necessarily, right? Like you could be like, yeah, it's cool people do it and like not be invested in it, but like you genuinely seem to be just like really enamored by like the cool things people are doing with the system, which is awesome.
Because it is a constant surprise, right? Like every single time somebody makes something, it's like, okay, so what is your spin on it? How are you gonna trick me, or how are you gonna surprise me? Because everybody does it, and everybody has just unbelievably cool takes on the system. I mean, like Monster Guts. Lumen is based off of the idea of you're just wiping out mobs of goons because again, looter shooters. But Monster Guts is a monster hunter game, so you're fighting a singular monster. So like how that goes so counter to what Lumen is supposed to be about or how it's designed, and yet it's really really good and has captured that vibe really really well, and does really cool stuff with sort of a grid-based system, which again counter to how Lumen is played, but does it in a very clever way. There's every single game out there is very cool. So I've had a lot of fun just reading them and seeing what people are doing.
That's awesome. Oh, I meant to ask you this at the beginning of the show and I forgot. Which day this week is your birthday?
Oh, Saturday is
very cool.
The 12th.
And so you're doing a really cool thing for your birthday. Do you want to tell folks about it, and then we can maybe do some linking here?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So this is my birthday week. I've just declared I'm going to do the whole week.
And listen, if you're going to celebrate your birthday week, this is the way to do it. Like other people that might be totally obnoxious, but this is the opposite of obnoxious.
So every day of the week, whenever I wake up and I get my coffee, so there's no set time. Whenever I'm awake and ready to type it into the computer, I choose one of my games that's for money. So I have a lot of free games, but one of my paid games on itch, and I just make it free for the whole day. And anybody can go download and claim the game, and it automatically attaches it to your itch account. And I just hit an RNG. I go to a random number generator every day, and I go, all right, which one is it going to be? And so we're on day 2. It's still up for a couple more hours at least. Score, which was my first RPG.
Oh, that's so perfect.
Which is pretty cool.
We should have talked more about that in the show.
It's okay. It's my crime. It's where my obsession with crime. It's a heist game.
I love heist games.
It's inspired by Payday. Again,
I love Payday. Great game.
I love video games so much, and so I was like, I got to bring Payday to role-playing games. So,
okay.
Slayers was yesterday, so I know it's late. So Slayers, but I'll be doing a new one tomorrow morning, and every day up until Saturday for my birthday. And then who knows? I'll probably do something else on top of all that.
I just linked Score in there, and also I grabbed it while I was
nice, good, excellent.
Because I just linked it in there, and so it's random, right? So you don't know what tomorrow's will be.
Don't know what it's going to be. I do eliminate the games that have come before, right, so that there's no repeats. It keeps it interesting. But yeah, so tomorrow I'll hit the button and see which one it's going to be. And truly, folks can just claim it. There's no need to throw any money at it. Just enjoy the games. That's what I want people to do for my birthday week, is to read them, enjoy them, do with them what they will. So hopefully folks enjoy Slayers from yesterday, enjoy Score from today, and whatever else comes out this week.
That's a cool way of celebrating your birthday and letting people giving something away. I mean, there's obviously not obligated in any way, shape, or form to give your games away. So to do that as a way to celebrate your birthday is pretty awesome.
Thank you.
I can't wait to read the rules for Score, especially now that I know it's your first game. I'm always intrigued by people's first game, like to see where they started out designing.
It's an interesting one, I'll tell you that. It's definitely it's clearly a me game, but it's also different than a lot of the other things I've done. Yeah. Also, weirdly enough, it got an Annie nomination for best rules, which was real weird. I didn't expect that. So it's decent. I think it's pretty cool. So and there's really cool layouts and art in there. So cool. At the very least, go look at the very good layout that my friend Mike did.
I've just now learning. This is just personal to me now, but I'm learning to do layouts for my own game in order to publish, right? And I want to learn to do layouts well, and so I'm really interested now in how people lay out games. So now that's like all. Now I'm learning like InDesign. All I see when I look at pages is layouts, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, oh, look at that. I love that idea. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like a hyper obsession of mine right now.
You can't turn it off, right? Like
Exactly.
we just bought a house, and so we still walk around, and we can't turn off like looking at houses and be like,
yep.
I wonder what that house is like. I wonder,
or I wonder how much that house costs. Or
right,
exactly.
And it's the same. Like I'm also training myself on layout now too. Where it's like every time I read something, I'm like, but how do they do this? Like
exactly.
I'm trying to like the text, whatever, erase the text from my brain. I want just how do they make things look the way that they did?
Well, and that's that's speaking of psychology, like probably your cognitive psychology probably helps that a lot too, right? Like you were saying, the way your eyes look at a digital, like, is different than paper, right?
Right.
So like I'm sure that probably helps you with layout design in a way that, like, I don't know any of that aspect of it. I just know what I think looks good on a page.
Well, the tricky thing is, like, what like technically works, like theoretically is best for people, but then you have Morkborg over there, and you're like, well, that doesn't work at all, but it's really good, and I really like it. So sometimes I have to like shut off the part of my brain that's like, you should technically do it this way. It's like, no, this looks cooler.
That's fascinating. Cool. Well, I'm trying to think if I had any last questions I wanted to make sure I covered with you. Am I forgetting? I always forget at least something. But I know. I always ask people, like, what are you working on now?
Oh boy, I am. I've got kind of two main projects that I'm working on right now. I am working on the Light Beacon edition, which is sort of the definitive version of Light. Like we said, Light came out in November of 2020, and I released a couple of season passes of material to support it. And so now I am bringing it all together, rewriting, updating the rules, and it's all going to be in one complete book with new art and layout. And that'll come sometime later this year. Between now and then, I'm going to be releasing another Light supplement that is for a more casual or lower stakes or shorter session way of playing Light, where it's sort of like an open world hex crawl sort of component, where if you just have like 30-45 minutes to kill, like you're down a player or something like that, you can do this without losing your session and still have like some fun with Light. So that'll come out probably in April if I keep to my if I can actually pull myself away from Elden Ring and write it.
Yeah, good luck.
Finish writing it. And then I mentioned Josh Hiddy, who did Vibe Check earlier. Josh and I are working on a game called Void, which is the next game in sort of the Light Nova Void Lumen iteration, where Josh and I are obsessed with arcane occult sci-fi. So like when magic meets sci-fi, but like really messed up like rituals and like gnarly arcane stuff. And so that is our next game that we're working on right now.
That sounds awesome.
Very early stages of rules. We were going in one direction and we said, wouldn't this direction be cool? So we're kind of walking down this path just to see how it goes. Mm-hmm. Could be the path we take, or we might say that was a nice detour, we'll go home.
Sure.
But that's the next one. Not sure when that's going to be, but that's the next like big new thing. This year is a lot of, for me, like building on existing things. So like Slayer's 1.5 rule update happens later this year. The Slayer's Almanac gets published in 2 months. I'm going to do like a Nova supplement. So I've got a lot of games that I really enjoy writing. And I talked about this on Twitter the other day, where I've started to shut off the idea that I need to make like a whole new thing like constantly, but instead just like I made a couple of games that I really like.
Yeah.
And I think it would be I think I would just be okay if I said, I'm just going to keep making things for these games that I like.
Yeah.
Like I could live for the rest of my life making Slayers, Light, and Nova stuff for the most part and be pretty happy. So I'm this year is me embracing that and sort of like adding more life and flexibility and cool things to do with my existing games.
That's awesome. And plus the other cool thing about that is that like you also have Lumen as an SRD, and then other people can make new things with it, and it's, and you get to see that happen simultaneously. So like,
exactly.
yeah, I feel like that's cool.
I live vicariously through the designs of other people.
There
Like
you
I
go.
was talking with Sam the other day, who's currently itch funding
Right,
Lumen
Lumen
Rider.
Rider, yeah.
And I'm watching that and I'm going like, this is so I have nothing to do with this game, and yet I feel so happy to see it succeed.
Yeah. Sam's on the list of people who obviously need to come on this show so we can talk
Yeah.
about Christian, like Sam's Christian games and all that stuff. So yeah, it's a I get, that actually was a good reminder for me to start scheduling guests in post April, because this show has guests scheduled through partially through a part of April.
Nice.
And then I had to pause because like I was kind of aggressive going into this year, and I was like, I'm gonna book people all the way like as far out as I can. And then I'm like,
Right.
well, actually, that's not the best, because like people release games and they don't always know when they're going to release them. And so like when you're working with game designers, like actually someone might not know in January that in September they're going to be, crowdfunding a game.
Right.
And plus, like I've just met all these new people, and like all these people want to get on the show. So I kind of paused, and I'll be rebooking people. I mean, Sam's another good example. Like I didn't know Sam existed at the beginning of the year. So like, now Sam's at the top of my list of people to book on the show, because I've looked at all of Sam's Christian games and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like perfect for Holy Happy Hour.
I think, yeah, you two will have an awesome conversation about that. So
looking forward to it for sure.
But
whereas like you're somebody that people for like ages have been like, you got to have Spencer on Holy Happy Hour, Batman, because like his games have inspired, well, people now have seen you on here because we've had other Illuminated games on before we had you on. So yeah, we've got there a roundabout way. So. Spencer, thank you so much for coming on the show and taking the time to come on.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. This was a blast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for saying so. I'm glad, and I'm glad we got to make it happen. So I'm gonna now send you back to our digital green room, banish you here with my mage powers. So like I said, huge thanks to Spencer for making the time to come on the show. It is deeply appreciated. And huge thanks to all of you for watching, whether you watch this live or watching after the fact. This was a particularly awesome and fun episode, so I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So if you're watching this whenever, a few things you can do to support the show. You can hit follow on Twitch if you haven't yet. You could subscribe on Twitch if you really want to support the show. You could subscribe on YouTube. I'm so sorry to YouTube people watching this. If anyone's watching this live, I'm not sure, because we started a little late. I forgot to hit the button. I sent it to the wrong YouTube. I'm sorry. But the whole thing will go up on YouTube in its entirety tomorrow. So, the whole thing will be up there. I'll just have to do it a different way. So, like, let's see. If you like supporting, the content of this show, if you like supporting conversations about TTRPGs, the intersection of philosophy, spirituality, psychology, religion, these are just some ways that you can support what we do. And we got a chatter there, Socrates. Love the name. And I love the compliment. Thank you so much. And thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. I'm glad you caught it also. If you only caught part of the show out there and you're watching this, you can catch the whole thing in its entirety at allportsopen.com, where you can watch every episode of the show afterward. And you can also subscribe to us, as I said, on YouTube. There is now a Holy Happy Hour Batman YouTube channel, which has all the episodes on that's all there is there. It's just Holy Happy Hour Batman on the YouTube. So huge thanks to my All Ports Open Network co-founder, Joshua Wise. He did the artwork here on the stream, and of course everything he does to keep our network going, and all the work behind the scenes. And huge thanks to Doctor Octoroc for the use of his music on the show, which you heard at the beginning and you're going to hear again in just a second. So I'm Ben. I'm That Gamer Priest is my handle here on Twitch. We will be back. Who is on next week? I usually prep that and put it here in my notes, but I forgot to do it. So it's going to be a surprise. Go to Twitter. On Twitter, if you follow at Benjamin Wallace on Twitter, you can find the cocktail recipe inspired by light from Spencer. If you want to find that cocktail recipe, it's already up there on Twitter. And you'll be able to find, I would say, tomorrow, probably if you're watching this live or whatever, or later, a thread that'll have the full episode on YouTube of this conversation, and then it'll have a link to what's coming up next week, since I forgot. So that's embarrassing, but it happens to me. So, all right, folks, thanks again for watching. Enjoy the holiest and happiest of hours. Hey, if you stick around here for a second, we don't have the worst days episode tonight from All Ports Open. So, we might raid into something else, because there are some other folks we know who are streaming right now. So maybe we'll raid anyway. So stick around, don't go anywhere. I'll play a Delinquent Comics ad, and then I'll raid you into something. So thanks again for watching. Have a good night, everybody.
Calling all citizens of Halcyon City. The newest generation of heroes are now painting the pages of Delinquent Comics, a Masks new generation actual play podcast. Complete back issues are available now on allportsopen.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are found. You can help join the fight and hear the newest releases early by becoming a supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/allportsopen. New bi-weekly episodes become available to all citizens on May 24th, featuring the newest arc, The Sunset Island Saga.